A newly unsealed FBI search warrant underscores the depths of the U.S. military's extremism problem. The Daily Beast reporting an active-duty U.S. Marine came under federal investigation for allegedly plotting with at least 2 others to assassinate minorities, drug users, and employees of the Democratic National Committee with explosives, rocket launchers, and automatic rifles. One of the suspects had links to the Atomwaffen Division, a violent neo-Nazi group linked to at least 5 murders. A handful of active service members and veterans have been identified as being members of that group, which calls for the armed overthrow of the U.S. government. One of the 3 involved have been sentenced to prison on gun charges, and a Marine Corps spokesman confirmed to the Daily Beast that the Marine in question has been fired. Joining our conversation, someone we turn to more and more often these days, Paul Rieckhoff, president of Righteous Media, founder of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and host of the Independent Americans podcast. Matt Dowd is still with us. Paul, I read this with horror. I read it and said, we need Paul to come on tomorrow and talk about this. But is this flashing red, not to overuse that term that I've come to use for the threat of domestic violent extremism? Is it flashing red inside the military?
Yes, and it was flashing red a year ago, 2 years ago. This is the #1 national security threat in America. I've been saying that for years. Others have been saying that for years. Domestic extremists who can plan to attack not just the federal government, but local government, American citizens. This is the new war on terrorism. We used to fear al-Qaeda or ISIS, bombers. Now we fear guys like this. And it only takes one. It just takes one Timothy McVeigh. It takes one active duty Marine to inflict mass casualties and serious damage. So this is something the military was slow to recognize. Policies were slow to change, and folks are falling through the cracks. And we'll never know how many others we don't know about. The FBI, CIA, whoever else has caught some of these guys and gals. Maybe they're behind bars somewhere else. It only takes one. But there are a lot more than one out there. And the FBI is still hunting many of them that were a part of January 6th. So this is the #1 flashing red light for the Pentagon, for the president, and I hope for all Americans.
Paul, what can be done to kind of loosen lines of communication to sort of, I mean, if after 9/11 it was if you see something, say something, what does that look like inside the military?
Well, I always think it starts at the top of the command climate. And we had a president who was stoking this, continues to stoke this for a long time in President Trump that I've called President Mayhem. He politicized the military, weaponized the military, and that legacy and playbook is continuing now with everything from the attacks on General Milley to Governor Kristi Noem in South Dakota sending the National Guard down to the border because she wants to. So it starts at the top and creates an environment where people feel like this is acceptable. This is welcomed, and this is even encouraged. But then at the tactical level, within the units, we've got to screen more aggressively for extremist connections. We've got to kick people out, and we've got to really get in their business. I mean, we've been hands off for a long time. I've said this over and over again. Last year, you could fly a Confederate flag in the Army barracks. That was allowed, and many presidents allowed that kind of stuff to go through, and now they're playing catch up. And America's got to be involved. This is not just the military's problem. This is America's problem, and the military is a reflection of that. But extremists are going to actively recruit within the active duty and the veterans community, the police community, anyone who can cause damage. That's what ISIS does in the Middle East, and that's what extremists are going to do back here.
Matt Dowd, we are in so many ways hindered with this mission of rooting out extremism in our own country and especially in the military. And it seems that foreign adversaries have exploited those structural challenges, but now enemies within seem to be doing the same thing. What, in your view, is that sort of whole of society solution look like?
Well, first, a shout out to my friend Paul, my oldest son Daniel, who did 2 tours in Iraq, went to work for Paul after he got back, a great organization that Paul had before he was now. So shout out to Paul for all he's done and everything and his friendship he gave to my oldest son. I mean, I think this is all part of what we were just talking about before. And I think the biggest part of the problem is you have a political party right now and a major cable news network that is feeding white grievance, I think one of the biggest tragedies or one of the biggest horrific things of the Trump presidency was the permission structure, the permissiveness he gave for white supremacists to act out. in the course of this. And keep in mind, it's not only the military who are legally allowed to carry guns and use guns, and law enforcement who's legally allowed to carry and use guns, but there's a lot of people in America. We have over 300 million guns in this country. So you look at the combination of the white supremacy. I don't think it's risen. I think it's just evidenced itself that we have a president that allowed it to be people to be fine, acting the way they do. And so what do? The first thing we have to do is be honest. Be honest with ourselves. Be honest that there is this element in our society that exists, that is there, that we have to deal with in the course of this. And then I think the only other step, as Paul laid out, is we have to do a much better due diligence, not only on people in the military, but people in law enforcement, and actually people that get guns. We should not be handing guns to white supremacists, and we are today.
I want to read both of you something about Timothy McVeigh that's just chilling, because, Paul, you're right. You have alluded to this around Merrick Garland's confirmation. We were reminded of his history of prosecuting McVeigh. This is from the Daily Beast reporting. Right-wing death squad, active duty Marine plotted to bomb DNC, murder black people. Travis Owens and his partners in the unrealized murder plot were influenced by Timothy McVeigh, the former U.S. Army soldier behind the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that left 168 people dead and injured nearly 700. Rhetoric in the private chat messages was consistent with racially motivated extremism ideology, to include aspirational violence against religious and racial minorities. I may reveal my ignorance here about domestic violent extremism, but is Timothy McVeigh fandom a thing? I mean, is that something that is chatted about and aspired to, Paul?
Yes. I mean, this is the world of QAnon, where strange and bizarre and dangerous things are celebrated. But even just on a very basic, tactical examination, you could pick through how Timothy McVeigh created the attack as something that someone's going to study, that people on both sides of this will study. But I think it's important to note that this suspect is a lowly enlisted guy, E1, the lowest level of enlisted you can be in the Marine Corps. He probably didn't have, access to tactical weapons beyond what a private would have. But it shows you the scope of how aggressive the recruiting is. And let's keep in mind, they also got General Flynn. I mean, the former national security advisor is all linked up with QAnon, spewing all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's not just lowly privates that we need to be worried about. It's the former national security advisor to the president, many people in Congress and across our culture. America is divided and at war with itself. And Putin loves this. Our enemies love this. I can continue to say this over and over again. Our enemies are celebrating. Osama bin Laden would love to see the former president attacking the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff while we're engaged in operations around the world. This is our worst nightmare, is an America divided that's so busy fighting itself, it can't fight our enemies.
Paul and Matt are sticking around because when we return, we're going to cover that story that Paul mentioned a little bit ago, a red state governor who is deploying the National Guard to the border with Mexico in a mission bought and paid for by a Republican megadonor. That's next.